BookTube, welcome back to my channel. Today is Friday, January 10th. We're here for a quick Friday Reads check-in. I'm going to share with you the books that I have read since the beginning of the year and the books that I'm currently reading. So I've been getting a lot of electronic downloads from my library because I don't go to my public library as often as I used to. I haven't been checking out a lot of physical books, but I've reserved quite a few ebooks and e-audiobooks, and they've been coming in on my reserves. So two of the books that I have finished since the start of the year have been electronic downloads that I've gotten from the library. So I don't have physical copies to show you, and it takes so much time to get insert of a book cover, and I don't want to edit this video, so you'll look up the videos, you look up the books if you're interested in seeing their covers, but I'm just going to tell you about them. So last year I made a video where I asked you guys, I showed you a short list of books from my shelves, and I asked you to choose the book that I would read first, and I wanted to be true to that. I wanted to respect your choice. Most people voted for me to read Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, and I started reading it. It's the first book that I started in the year, but I haven't finished it because the physical book is what I have on my shelves, and it's pretty heavy. So I don't get to walk around with books much these days because I feel like I always have to be walking around with a baby. I downloaded an e-audiobook from the library, and I've been listening to it, but I prefer the print. To read this book, I feel like the print makes it a little bit easier to follow the story because it is a story that is happening in multiple instances. Life After Life is about a young girl named Ursula who, when we meet her, she's a mature woman, and she's the person who shoots Hitler and kills him. But then we go back to the beginning of her life, and there are several instances, one of which she dies before she's born, and one of which she barely survives and grows up. And as we follow her life, we're following each instance where she could have died and going back to revisit that scene where she's saved instead. And I'm liking the story, but I don't want to miss out on anything. A lot of people have said how much they love this book, so I feel like I need to be following everything that's happening in order to keep track of what's going on, because there are all these parallel universe, parallel instances that are happening. So the audiobook doesn't allow me to keep track as much. The fact is that or is it the fact that, I don't know, that phrase just makes me think of Duck's Newbury Report, which I haven't read, by the way. But going back to this, the fact is that when I'm listening to an audiobook, it's because I'm doing something else, and I feel like that doesn't give me the opportunity to really get immersed into the story as I want to. So I feel like at this point I've read the parts of the book that I've read so far. I've read them twice because I've listened to them, as well as I've read them in the print version. So I think I'm just going to focus on reading the print version from now on, and next time I tell you about this book, I will have finished it, I hope. So that's the first book that I started, but I haven't finished. So I'm going to tell you instead about the three books that I've finished since the beginning of the year. The first of which was Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout, and that is the continuation of Olive Kitteridge, which was a series of interlinked short stories where we meet this mature woman who's living in Maine. Her name is Olive Kitteridge, so the collection is named after her. And so even though she's not the main character in each story shows us something more about Olive Kitteridge, because as we meet her neighbors and see them having their lives go on and how Olive pops in and pops out of those stories, we learn who Olive is. And Elizabeth Strout, she won the Pulitzer for that collection, and so she's returned with Olive Again, which is the same format. We're reading more about Olive Kitteridge's story, where we're seeing her in relationship with all these people. So in the first story, she was married, she had an adult son. Like I said, they had a complicated relationship. In Olive Again, her husband has died, and the complications with her son, they have not been resolved. But now Olive has a new husband, a new man in her life. And so we get to see Olive through all these interactions. We get to see her again in a romantic relationship where we get to think about what it's like to be in love as an older person. And I admire the character that Elizabeth Strout has created for us, because Olive ages gracefully. She's not one to put on airs. She's not one to take on pretenses. I like the character that Elizabeth Strout has created, but I also like how she relates to the other characters in the book. So Olive Again was the first book that I finished in 2020, and I gave it a 5-star rating, even though I acknowledge that it was not a perfect book. There were some missed opportunities. There were some things that I think that Elizabeth Strout could have done that she didn't, and a couple of things that she incorporated that I felt like she could have omitted, and I probably would have preferred the book. But I gave it 5 stars, not because of the book's perfection, but because of how it speaks to me. I so admire how Olive interacts with her community, how she interacts with the people in her life, where she's real, she's intimate. She's not a fluffy personality. She doesn't go around and she's not the kind of person who's going to bake cookies and call the neighborhood children in. She doesn't even seem to engage very well with her own grandchildren. And that's one of the things that her son calls her out on, because her son has 2 biological children and 2 stepchildren with his wife. And he chastises his mother or critiques her for trying to engage with her grandchildren but not acknowledging his stepchildren. I admire Olive because we get to see her motives even when we don't see them working out the way she probably would have intended. I just like her. So yeah, Olive Again was the first book that I finished in 2020, and I feel like I'm rambling about it, so I'm gonna stop. After Olive Again, I picked up Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o, and this one, we got this as a gift from our cousins for Christmas. It's a gift for the baby, and I was reading it to her, but she fell asleep, so I continued reading it for myself, and I really enjoyed it. This also meets one of the prompts in the Reading Women Challenge. This meets the challenge of book by a person of color. This is Lupita Nyong'o on the back. She's an actress. And this book is about embracing your outward appearance and not relying on what you look like to consider yourself to be beautiful. I think it's a really great message to teach to young children, young girls, but also young boys. Appearance doesn't, concern about appearance is not just limited to females, right? I really enjoyed this one. I love the illustrations. I shared a picture from this on Instagram yesterday. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is the double page spread of the 2 sisters, night and day, and how they are represented here. I love. Like, yes, the day picture, the day sister is beautiful, but look how gorgeous her night sister is. That is a beautiful woman. And I'm not going to say she's a beautiful dark-skinned woman, because she's beautiful regardless of the color of her skin. I love this. I loved a lot of things about this book. I really like the fact that the illustrations cover the open page, that they go across the open page before they go down. I think that that is a really logical and systematic way to represent pictures, to represent a story. And I like the way it was presented here. So kudos to the illustrator. Her name is Vashti Harrison, and kudos to Lupita Nyong'o for, using her platform to create and promote a book like this, promote the image of dark-skinned women and how beautiful they are regardless of the color of their skin, because beauty isn't skin deep, right? So Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o is the second book that I finished, but I read that while I was reading another ebook. So the next book that I finished, my third book for 2020, is another ebook from the library, and that is Ann Patchett's newest release, The Dutch House. This is my second Ann Patchett book, and I've loved both of them that I have read. I own 2 of her books. They're on my TBR shelves, and I haven't gone to them yet. So I think next I will try to pick up one of her other books. I have Bel Canto and Run, and I haven't read either of them, even though I've heard such really great things about Bel Canto especially. So I should get to that sometime soon. But The Dutch House. 2 main people characters in the story are Maeve and Danny. They're siblings, and Maeve is the older sibling. She remembers having lived with their parents outside of the Dutch house and having moved there, but Danny was born there. He spent his childhood there, and so a lot of their experiences, a lot of their childhood memories are, a lot of their shared childhood memories happen in that home. And so even after they leave, they have this strong connection to this house that explains a lot of who they become as adults. But the Dutch house, I say that Maeve and Danny are the main people characters, because the Dutch house itself is a character. In fact, it is a protagonist in the story, because how the characters relate to the house, show who they are. Their relationship to the house is what moves the story forward. And there were parts of this story that reminded me of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I read last month, because the father figure in the Dutch house, after his first wife leaves, he remarries, and he remarries this younger woman, and she moves into the Dutch house. At first, she seems to be really attracted to the house, but then she seems to be a little bit intimidated by what the house represents, and overwhelmed almost by her desire to put her own imprint onto this house. And so it is this house, it is the relationship that each one of these characters has with the home that is their undoing. It is the basis for the relationships starting and ending, but it's also the way to show who these characters are. And so I found this book fascinating. The fact that this author could present the dynamic where this house becomes so important to these people. I thought that was really interesting as a storytelling technique. Another thing that I really admired about the Dutch house was how Patchett represented the gender disparity. Most of the characters in the book were female, but we're being asked to see them through the eyes of a male narrator and to observe and analyze essentially female complexities, but see them being talked about, see them being discussed through the perspective of a man. And there was a really interesting conversation where Maeve and Danny were discussing some of the choices that their mother made, and Danny was very critical of his mother, critical of the choice that she made to leave her children when they were so young, leave them to be brought up by other people, leave her husband, essentially leave her home abandoned for other people to occupy. And you know, Danny's very critical of her, and he asks a question. What kind of a person leaves her children? What kind of a person goes off to do something that she considers to be a big important job and leaves her children behind? And Maeve responds quite angrily, men do that. And so she mentions the Buddha and these Greek heroes like Odysseus, and you know, men who left their families and went off to do really big important things, and centuries later we're still singing their praises. We never ask, what about the children that they left at home? And I thought that was such a really interesting feminist statement that Patchett included there, by forcing Danny to reckon with what society asks women to give up, and some of the names that we call these women when they make choices other than what we consider to be norms. I thought that was a fascinating subplot for the book. So I really enjoyed the Dutch house. I gave this one somewhere between 4 and 5 stars because I really enjoyed it. Doris from Audiobooks read it recently, and she listened to the audiobook that was read by Tom Hanks, and so she recommends the audio version as well. I read the ebook version from the library, so I don't know, maybe when I reread this book I'll try to find the audiobook so I can listen to it there as well. So that's my Friday reads. 3 of the 4 books that I mentioned so far were on my reading list for the month, so I'm doing pretty well with sticking to my plans. I do have other books that I'm interested in though, other than my TBR, so I want to hurry up and get through my TBR so that I can look at some other titles as well. So I'd love to chat with you in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, what you've been reading. What's the book that you finished first in 2020? Was it something that you chose strategically because you wanted it to be your first read of the year? And how did it work out for you? I'd love to chat with you in the comments. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let's talk down there. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.